can see we have a couple of telephone poles with a couple of wires connected between the two of them. Now, if we hit play on the scene and we grab one of these poles, we can wiggle it around, and right away you can see the wires are reacting naturally like you'd want them to, which is pretty cool and all in all not that challenging to set up. So let's hop into a new scene and I'll show you how we can do that. So let's go ahead and create a spline. I'm gonna go to the top view and just draw roughly a straight line here. And if we select those points one at a time, we can make them a bit more usable. Let's zero out the Y and the Z, go negative 200 on the X, and again, zero out the Y and the Z, and positive 200 on the X. So that's gonna work well for us. I also wanna subdivide this, so let's go up to Mesh, Commands, choose Subdivide. The shortcut for that is US on the keyboard. I think that's gonna be plenty of points for our simulation. So let's go ahead and add the Spline Dynamics tag to this. So under the hair tags, choose Spline Dynamics. Now if we press play, the whole thing just falls because we haven't connected it to anything quite yet. So let's create a couple nulls. I'm gonna create a null, move one to this side and change it to positive 200 on the X, one on this side at negative 200. And if you want to actually see your nulls, sometimes it's helpful to change the display from dot to something like circle. And let's connect our spline to them. If we select our point here on the right side and we right click, choose hair tags constraint, we want to set the constraint to that null. So let's drag the first null in and hit set. And let's come over to this side, grab this point, and let's add another constraint tag, drag the second null in, and hit set. Now, if we press play, you'll notice that it sort of droops between the two of them instead of just falling, which is pretty cool. But before we move on, let's go ahead and actually make this renderable. So I'm gonna come over here and grab an end side, and I'm also gonna grab a sweep. Now the end side's pretty huge by default, so I'm gonna make this about 1.5 centimeters. And if we grab that end side and the spline and drag them both into the sweep, we already have ourselves a wire. The end side has 6 sides by default, but if you want to smooth that out, maybe we could set it to something like 9. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. So the cool thing about setting this up with nulls is that we can easily make copies of this and place it wherever we want. So before we move on, let's go ahead and put this all into a group. I'm just gonna call this wire 1. And let's bring in a telephone pole. There's one, let's move it to this side, and let's grab another and move it to this side. I'm not gonna worry too much about placing it, and also maybe this wire is a little bit thick. I asked Andrew about it and he said, oh, don't worry, that's just DSL. And I don't even know what DSL is, but we can loosely maybe put this null on one of these little things and come over to the other side and do the same thing. And whenever we're ready, we can grab this wire and just control drag it. And now we have a second copy that we can put anywhere else on this pole, and it's super quick to just iterate. Another fun thing we could do is maybe have one of these wires break off. So let's go ahead and just create a ground plane real quick. I'm gonna move this down, scale it up, and let's make it a hair collider. And at any given point, we could grab one of these constraint tags and set the influence down to 0, and you can watch the wire just fall from its place. And that's already looking pretty cool. So say you wanted to keep this exactly as it is without changing it at all. Well, you can cache it. So if you click your Spline Dynamics tag, there's a cache tab where you can click calculate, and it's gonna bake it out. So now it's not going to continuously simulate, it's just gonna remember what it is that it needs to do. For the film, I ended up creating a project that had just a bunch of cached wires in it, and they were already all set up so that way we could copy from this project and paste them anywhere we wanted in our final scene. Now, one final tip I want to leave you guys with, and this can apply to pretty much any dynamic situation. Before you cache anything, make your timeline a lot longer than necessary. That way you can right-click on your object that's simulated and choose this Bake as Alembic option. That'll give you access to a few new settings, one of which is this time offset that you can use to create some fast variation in your scene. So I'll just show you what I mean real quick. I have these 4 wires that are all Alembic files. So if I grab this whole setup, slide it over, And then I grab all 4 of these wires on this new copy, and I change the time offset to something like -150. And again, I have a lot of extra room because I made this timeline so long. When we press play, these 2 copies aren't acting exactly the same, even though they're all created from the exact same simulation.
I think one of the coolest things that you see in movies is when the tree